His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani as President of the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries. It is so decided. I congratulate His Highness on his election, and I invite him to take his seat at the podium to take over the proceedings of the conference, and I request the protocol to escort His Highness.
سعادة أنطونيو غوتيريش الأمين العام.
Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Csaba Kőrösi, President of the 77th Session of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Lechezara Stovia, President of the Economic and Social Council, distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and a privilege for me to have been elected President of the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries, and I wish everyone success in achieving the goals of this conference. In the name of God, the most merciful, most gracious, peace and God's blessings be upon you. I would like to welcome you in Doha, and I wish you a pleasant stay. The Least Developed Countries 5th Conference is being held in light of serious challenges that the world is witnessing and that are a result of new international conflicts, as well as the international food crisis and climate change, not to mention the continued aftershocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are required to face these challenges and to keep them in consideration as we plan for the joint and common future of our countries and nations for the next decade in the life of the LDCs group. Billions in these countries continue to suffer from poverty and the lack of food, healthcare, and education. There is no doubt that this is primarily a structural issue related to the absence of a balance in the relationship between advanced industrial centers and the peripheries in our world. But it is also a matter of developmental and economic policies that are soundly implemented in LDCs. Some of these LDCs have managed to overcome the marginalization because of their development policies. However, in all cases, this is our common cause. This is a global cause. And this must be realized by developed countries and their societies. Our meeting is being held as our brothers and sisters in Turkey and Syria continue to suffer from the effects of the huge earthquake that hit them and that damaged millions and affected their lives. And here, on your behalf, I reaffirm our solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Turkey and Syria, and I call on you all to support Turkey's efforts to overcome the effects of this catastrophe. I would also like to confirm the need to lend assistance with no hesitation to our brotherly Syrian people. And I am puzzled by the delay in aid given to this people, and I confirm that it is wrong to abuse a humanitarian tragedy for political purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no way we can build a new world in a manner that is safer and more just and free for today and tomorrow, except through global human solidarity. Therefore, holding this conference is a renewed statement of our solidarity and the unity of our common will to confront joint challenges and search for effective and sustainable solutions. This conference is an important opportunity to evaluate what has been achieved within the framework of the Istanbul Programme of Action, which was adopted over a decade ago. Here, the Doha Programme of Action, which crowned the intergovernmental negotiations that took place in New York when it was adopted by consensus, is the basis of a roadmap to support and confront the problems facing LDCs in the upcoming decade. The conference will not succeed simply by adopting this program, but by implementing it and implementing it well. We value what was achieved within the 5 outputs that were adopted for LDCs, which are in the form of establishing a food storage network, a food storage facility, as well as an online university and different platforms for these countries, and adopting comprehensive measures by stakeholders to alleviate the disputes and alleviate crises and build resilience, and to implement investment plans in these states, and to develop a facility for the graduation of LDCs in a sustainable manner. Distinguished guests, there is a common global responsibility in confronting the challenges of food security and climate change and energy crisis and the debt crisis, and finding solutions is a collective and important responsibility among all countries. However, regardless of our analysis in respect of the backgrounds of the gap between developed and the least developed countries, there is a moral obligation incumbent upon the rich and developed countries to contribute more to assist the least developed countries to overcome the global challenges that we are now dealing with. This is a responsibility and not a favor. On the other hand, the least developed countries must create the conducive conditions to transform joint crises into national action at the level of strategies, plans, and national legislations. These countries are not responsible for the past, yet it is their duty to adopt and follow rational policies for the present. We say this while at the same time we take into consideration existing structural obstacles and the unequal relationship between the global north and the global south. Ladies and gentlemen, I avail myself of this opportunity to commend the positive initiatives to combat poverty and address the urgent needs for food security in many poor countries. However, the food security crisis cannot be solved only by providing emergency humanitarian aid or temporary remedies. Rather, it is also necessary to assist these countries achieve their food security. We have put forward initiatives within the context of addressing the root causes of the problems, such as the initiative of the Global Dryland Alliance to enable dryland countries to achieve food security. Others have put forward their own initiatives as well. It might be appropriate to revive the theme of the Secretary General of the United Nations of no poverty in the world. The realization of this requires an international synergy to implement a human development plan at the global level. Here we must pay due attention to the relationship between peace and development. Food security and development cannot be achieved against the backdrop of raging civil wars in a number of the poorest countries in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, in the context of our discussion of urgent international crises and their dire repercussions on least developed countries, we see the debt crisis, which has crippled the growth and development in these countries, as is strongly evident. Here we value the efforts made by the G20, especially the extraordinary summit of leaders hosted by the Brotherly Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the COVID-19 pandemic, and the steps taken under the presidency of Italy regarding the debt service suspension period for the poorest countries. However, the debt issue needs to be addressed more comprehensively in a way that takes into consideration justice and pragmatism to break the vicious cycle through which countries opt to borrow for developmental purposes, such as building infrastructure and so on. Debt repayment thus exacerbates poverty and prevents the implementation of development projects. As for the climate crisis, the Sharm el-Sheikh summit held in sisterly Egypt made an achievement in establishing the Loss and Damage Fund allocated to assist and support developing countries. Based on our commitment to combating climate change and the internationally approved policies in this regard, we aspire that the advanced industrial countries would fulfill their legal and moral responsibilities in taking more effective and efficient decisions and measures on emissions. Ladies and gentlemen, the State of Qatar takes pride in continuing its active role in multilateral international action across the different fields of development and humanitarian issues, human rights, and mediation to promote international peace and security. In this context, and based on our National Vision 2030, which upholds the values and principles of cooperation, partnership, and solidarity in helping countries, peoples, and communities suffering from humanitarian crises, conflicts, poverty, and debt, the State of Qatar has made a lot of humanitarian and development contributions in accordance with the formulas of bilateral and multilateral cooperation, especially within the framework of strategic partnerships with the United Nations and other leading international organizations and institutions. Based on the State of Qatar's firm commitment to supporting the contribution of least developed countries, I announced a financial contribution of a total amount of $60 million, of which $10 million will be allocated for supporting the implementation of the Doha Program of Action for LDCs. $50 million will be allocated for supporting the intended outcomes of the Doha Program of Action and building resilience in the least developed countries. I urge development partners to follow the example of Qatar and take the initiative to support the implementation of the Doha Program of Action as part of our humanitarian and developmental duty towards the peoples of least developed countries. We are confident that this conference, and by means of building on the successes achieved in the course of realizing growth, prosperity, and creating sustainable livelihoods, it will contribute to supporting the least developed countries' march towards achieving development in the next 10 years, and in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In conclusion, I welcome you again in Doha, the city that offers a spacious ambience for mediations and for debate and multilateral conferences and cultural activities and intellectual production. Doha, the city that has recently witnessed the most successful World Cup tournament ever. I wish this conference to realize its desired goals and to achieve the aspirations of the peoples of these countries whose attention is focused on what would come out from this important conference. May God's peace and blessings be upon you.
أدعو الآن
I now invite His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, to address the conference.
Your Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. This conference was originally scheduled to January 2022. The sudden cancellation due to the Omicron wave of the COVID-19 pandemic was yet another reminder that the world is subject to constant and unexpected change. And indeed, since then, we have seen the eruption of war in Ukraine with a devastating impact on Ukrainians, but also on least developed countries struggling with skyrocketing food and energy costs. Meanwhile, global tensions and divides are deepening, and so we must find ways to come together. And there is perhaps no more important issue around which we can and must unite than in transforming the words of the Doha Programme of Action into results. We don't have a moment to lose. Least developed countries are being stranded amidst a rising tide of crisis, uncertainty, climate chaos, and deep global injustice. They are unable to keep pace with lightning speed technological change. Systems are stretched from health and education to social protection, infrastructure, and job creation. Unemployment is rising, especially among young people, and women are being pushed to the sidelines. And the deeply dysfunctional and unfair global financial system is handing least developed countries the rawest of deals. Least developed countries face interest rates that are up to 8 times higher than developed countries, and it is only getting worse. Today, 25 developing economies are spending over 20% of government revenues not on building schools, not on feeding people, not on expanding opportunities for women and girls, but solely on servicing debt. Some have seen debt service payments skyrocket by 35%. So, Excellencies, least developed countries need a revolution of support across 3 key areas. First, they need immediate assistance to rescue the Sustainable Development Goals. For least developed countries, these goals represent survival in itself, from poverty eradication to food, health, clean water and sanitation. The September's SDG Summit is the centerpiece moment to demonstrate a global commitment for action. We have put forward and presented to the G20 an SDG stimulus to alter or to gather the world around the need to provide at least $500 billion a year to developing countries. And it's also high time that developed countries live up to their commitment to provide least developed countries with 0.15 to 0.20% of their gross national income for official development assistance. No more excuses. We must also expand international efforts to fight tax evasion, money laundering, and illicit financial flows that drain domestic resources. While no country or region is immune, lower-income countries lose a much higher proportion of their tax revenues to tax abuse, while having the least influence on global taxation rules. Least developed countries also need funding and support for structural transformation to climb the value chain, to massively invest in manufacturing and technological capabilities and better infrastructure and transportation networks, to give women a seat at decision-making tables of government, business and civic life, to invest in education and training, to generate a highly skilled workforce, and to strengthen institutions. The Doha Programme of Action is a practical guide to address all these issues. It contains concrete targets and deliverables, such as a Sustainable Graduation Support Facility, an Investment Support Centre, and an online university, which can play a game-changing role in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals in least developing countries. And so I call upon development partners to support the implementation of these deliveries and the achievement of the Doha Programme of Action targets. Second, we need to reform the global financial system through a new Bretton Woods moment. International financial institutions must develop creative ways to extending financing where the needs are greatest. And this includes expanding contingency financing and integrating disaster and pandemic clauses into debt instruments. It is also time to accelerate the reallocation of special drawing rights from the richest countries that receive the most to those who need help the most. Multilateral development banks should transform their business model to massive leverage funds to attract greater flows of private finance at reasonable cost into developing countries, in particular the least developed ones. And we must find new common sense ways to measure countries' economies, such as developing lending criteria that go beyond gross domestic product, to provide a true view of the value of natural capital, such as the preservation of forests, watersheds, and marine resources. Et troisièmement,
and thirdly, the least developed countries need a climate action support revolution. They produce less than 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It is, alas, tragic that close to 7 deaths in every 10 due to climate disasters happen in these countries. Developed countries must increase their support to the least developed countries to help them to adapt, to increase their resilience to climate change, and to transition more swiftly to renewable energy. They must honour the promise they made to mobilise $100 billion for developing countries and to simplify access to climate action financing. Make the loss and damage fund agreed on at the last COP operational. Honour the commitment to multiply by 2 adaptation finance, to replenish the Green Climate Fund to more ambitious levels. They must, in the next 5 years, support the creation of early warning systems for everyone in the world. And in September, I will convene a summit on climate ambition. This will be an opportunity for governments, companies, and civil society to move from words to actions when it comes to their net zero emissions commitments and to guarantee climate justice for the most affected populations. I'm also calling for a climate solidarity pact in order to mobilise financial and technical support to ramp up the transition of emerging economies to renewable energy and to keep the 1.5 degree goal alive. Your Highness, Excellencies, the era of unkept promises must come to an end. Now. Let us give their rightful place to the needs of the least developed countries at the very heart of our projects, our priorities, and our investments. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his statement. The conference shall now hear opening statements in accordance with the recommendations by the preparatory committee established for the conference. I now invite His Excellency Chaba Korochi, President of the 77th Session of the General Assembly, to address the conference.
Your Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the government and people of Qatar for their generosity and to host this 5th conference on LDCs in Doha. I'm grateful to have been invited to speak at the opening of this momentous event. Close to 2,000 years ago, the Greek historian Plutarch said, "An imbalance between rich and poor is the oldest and most fatal ailment of all communities." It is true to our global community today. This conference comes at a time when radical action to transform the economies of LDCs has never been more urgent. As we meet today, least developed countries have arrived at a crossroads on the path towards achieving the 2030 Agenda and its targets. It is deeply concerning to see that, according to the latest data, and in spite of the vast efforts, 1 in 3 people in LDCs are living in extreme poverty. Adding fuel to fire, the lingering long-term effects of pandemic, a tsunami of debt, exposure to disasters, and deepening inequalities. In many LDCs, women, girls, minorities, and other groups at risk still face large barriers in education, employment, and healthcare. And a shocking figure, even before the arrival of the pandemic, more than half of LDCs were in active conflict situations. Conflicts that will only be exacerbated by the disastrous impact of climate change. And by something equally ominous, that by the end of this decade, the demand for water is expecting to exceed supply by 40%. Evidently, much remains to be done by 2030. However, Excellencies, I am confident that we all want to deliver on our promise of achieving the 2030 Agenda and transforming the economies of LDCs. So let us take this time to decide on additional international support measures to advance the progress of LDCs. This will allow us to agree on renewed, genuine partnership between LDCs and development partners. Partnerships with a view to overcoming structural challenges, eradicating poverty, achieving development goals, and enabling more and more states to graduate from LDC category. For that to happen, it is imperative that countries feel real ownership of the Doha Programme of Action, a program of investing in people, of strengthening resilience and building international solidarity. Development partners should ensure that promises to LDCs to overcome their vulnerabilities are fulfilled. It was 42 years ago that the new Programme of Action was adopted by the international community in Paris with the goal of radically changing socio-economic situation in the LDCs. 4 decades and many lost opportunities later, we must hold ourselves finally accountable to the pledges we made. Excellencies, as we renew the global commitment to supporting the poorest and most exposed of the member states, we have a profound choice to make. Will we deliver our constituencies? Will we adapt our action to their needs and change the potential most of us are having to joint prosperity? Will we finally understand that, as the saying goes, we as a global community are only as strong as our weakest link? If we bolster the true partnership and harness technology and innovation, our goals can still be within reach by 2030. But to achieve that, all our decisions should be impactful and all our actions transformative. Starting from the international finance institutions should focus on to how we measure wealth and sustainable development, from reliance on science in decision-making to mobilize solidarity at all levels, from improving the standards of governance to new understanding of global common goods. This progress will not be easy, but I sincerely hope and see no better option for humanity. My team and I stand ready to assist the LDCs on their historic path. I wish you all the best in your deliberations. I thank you.
I thank the President of the General Assembly for his statement, and I now invite Her Excellency Lachezara Stoeva, President of the 2023 session of the Economic and Social Council, to address the conference.
Your Highness, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the government of Qatar for hosting this landmark gathering and for their exceptional hospitality. It is a privilege and an honor for me to be part of this momentous conference. The main principle of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is leaving no one behind, which means that priority should be given to helping those furthest behind first. And rightfully so, because collectively we are only as strong as the most vulnerable amongst us. This conference provides a unique opportunity for all of us to ensure that through a new global partnership, the least developed countries are equipped to deliver on crucial development goals by 2030. We have a collective responsibility to bolster their development efforts. Least developed countries have immense potential, rich human, cultural, and natural resources. What is needed is sustainable economic growth for all to live in peace and prosperity. Excellencies, the Doha Programme of Action is ambitious, innovative, bold, and offers a new multi-stakeholder alliance for the LDCs. It is shaped by the commitment of the LDCs and their development partners, governments at all levels, the private sector, and civil society. The United Nations system is critical to realizing the implementation of this ambitious agreement. Halfway to 2030, we must leverage the synergies between the Doha Programme of Action and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We must apply accelerators in each of the 6 priority areas of the Doha Programme of Action. Only this way can we overcome the impact of the ongoing crisis and regain momentum in achieving the 2030 Agenda in the least developed countries. It is urgent to address the interconnected crisis. Emergency action must be complemented by longer-term efforts to ensure sustainable recovery. Millions of young people and the growing working-age population in LDCs can drive transformative sustainable development. It is commendable that many LDCs have graduated or are in the process of graduating from the LDC category. This is a milestone for development. But such graduation must be irreversible, resilient, and sustainable. This requires country-specific support from the international community. The Economic and Social Council will do its part. The Sustainable Graduation Support Facility, included in the Programme of Action, aims to support the march towards sustainable graduation. Excellencies, all LDCs are highly vulnerable to rising prices and supply constraints for food and fuel. Tightening financing conditions have curtailed their ability to invest in sustainable development and to address the impact of climate change. To turn the tide and rescue the SDGs, as the Secretary General just mentioned, he has proposed a global SDG stimulus. It is important to rally to deliver it. We must act on our commitment to ensuring adequate funding for LDCs. Debt relief programs should be accessible for all LDCs. Concessional public development financing should have long been scaled up. Catalyzing higher investment flows in both physical and social infrastructure can drive greener growth and human development. It can enhance resilience to shocks and disasters. Conducive trade and investment policies are a critical foundation for breaking out of poverty. We need to act now. Excellencies, 2023 is a critical year for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The SDG Summit in September must turn the tide and revamp our efforts towards the SDGs. And the full implementation of the Doha Programme of Action will be key if we are to succeed. As President of the Economic and Social Council, I'm committed to mobilizing the whole ECOSOC system to help LDCs move from potential to prosperity. Let's make a difference together. Thank you.
I thank the President of the Economic and Social Council for her statement. I now invite His Excellency Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera, President of the Republic of Malawi and Chair of the Group of Least Developed Countries, to address the conference.
Your Highness, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar and President of LDC5, United Nations Conference, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellencies, Prime Ministers of Bangladesh and Turkey, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency, Ms. Rabab Fatima, Under-Secretary General and High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, distinguished delegates, partners, ladies and gentlemen, for those of us who met yesterday to kickstart in anticipation for what we are starting today, I trust that you had a restful night and come refreshed enough this morning to press ahead and make even more progress in pursuit of our shared objectives within the framework of the Doha Program of Action. I also trust that you are taking advantage of side meetings of this summit to have the necessary bilateral meetings for forging and strengthening the partnerships that will make the program a great success. Considering how well we have thus far been hosted by the State of Qatar, it is altogether appropriate for me to once again express utmost gratitude to His Highness and congratulations for chairing this, and the government, people of Qatar, for their hospitality accorded all of us. At the same time, we owe a debt of gratitude to the UN Secretary General and the United Nations Office of High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states for steering and coordinating the processes we are undertaking here. With friends like these, we need not fear any enemy. In fact, the enemy we need to be most vigilant against is our own complacency. We must recognize that what we are doing here in Doha makes this a pivotal point in world history. Just as the ancient era of world-conquering, warmongering kingdoms and empires gave way to a modern era of world policing, wealth-controlling, earth-polluting superpowers, so must this era give way to a postmodern one in which international and multilateral cooperation between nations that treat each other as equals rules the day. And I believe that in pursuit of that world, the LDCs are setting the pace and must sustain the momentum. When we depart from here, we must together protect the momentum we are building here. We simply cannot afford to lose it. We cannot afford to have the momentum of the Doha Program of Action suffer the same disruptions the Istanbul Program of Action suffered. As such, we must not focus so much on what other nations have that we do not. The greatest progress is always made by those who focus on what they themselves have and how to use it to build something better. And in our case, we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a reminder of the better days that lie ahead of us. So let us not give up. Let us press forward to finish what we started, and I'm sure that our development partners will respond with the necessary technical and financial support the same way the state of Qatar has done. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the President of the Republic of Malawi, and I now invite Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, Prime Minister of the People's Republic of Bangladesh, to address the conference.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Your Royal Highness, the Amir of Qatar, the President, Excellencies, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished participants, friends, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I am happy to be with you at this August gathering. I thank the government and the people of Qatar for their generous hospitality. I appreciate the forward-looking words we have just heard. In 1974, Bangladesh became a member state of UN under the leadership of my father, our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. At the time, Bangladesh, recognized as an LDC, was struggling to rebuild the war-ravaged economy. Unfortunately, the following year, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib, along with most of my family members, were brutally assassinated. My mother, my 3 brothers, and other family, about 18 members. My younger sister and myself, we were abroad that time. 6 years we couldn't return home. We stayed abroad as a refugee. After 6 years, I was able to return my home. To carry forward my father's legacy, we vote that Bangladesh will continue to champion the LDC causes. Bangladesh feels proud to have often acted as an LDC spokesperson in the last 5 decades. I attended the previous LDC conferences in Brussels and Istanbul. We are pleased that Bangladesh qualifies for LDC graduation. We now look forward to graduating in 2026. Bangladesh is the only LDC among the world's 50 largest economies in terms of GDP. Our march towards graduation is also marked by our efforts at just, inclusive, and sustainable development. We have cut down poverty rate from 31.5% to 20% within a decade. We are internationally recognized for disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. Our social protection measures constitute 16.6% 0.75% of our total budget. We have distributed about 700,000 free of cost houses to ensure shelter for all. We rank top the South Asia in reducing gender disparity. Our literacy rate stands at 75.2% with near universal primary education enrollment. The average life expectancy of our people is now more than 73 years. During COVID-19 pandemic, we provided 28 stimulus packages worth 6.15% of our GDP. Our economy proved its resilience by growing at 10%. Even in 2021 to 2022, per capita income grew threefold in a decade and has reached $2,824. Bangladesh is now a reliable partner in the international supply chain. We are the fast-growing digital economy and a potential regional hub for connectivity and logistics. Our next vision is to build a smart Bangladesh by 2041. Much of the Bangladesh story owes to international support measures we negotiated for LDC. The duty and quota-free access we secured from most developed and emerging economies helped our private sector build a solid manufacturing base. The patent waivers provided under TRIPS agreement allow us to meet 98% of our pharmaceutical needs. The exemption under other WTO agreements enable us to boost agricultural production and combat hunger, malnutrition. The international technical assistance we received help us make concrete development plans. However, LDCs need sustained support, double their share of global trade. ODA targets for LDCs from developed countries deserve to be fulfilled. International financial institutions have the means to support debt sustainability in LDCs. Climate financing for LDCs should be made flexible and predictable. Technology transfer to LDCs needs to be tangible and meaningful. Our migrant workers need protection for their rights and well-being. We cannot fail the 226 million youth in LDCs. The pandemic and then the war in Ukraine have dealt a major blow to LDC economies. The rise in food and fuel price in international markets have caused inflations in most LDCs. Added to this remain the climate crisis and long-drawn conflicts in certain LDCs. In Bangladesh, we are dealing with 1.2 million forcibly displaced Rohingya from Myanmar with no immediate solution. The Doha Program of Action is yet another assurance of hope for the world's most vulnerable countries. The international community must renew its commitment for real structural transformation in LDCs. For graduating LDCs, there should be some incentives for their performance. They should enjoy the international support measures for LDCs for an extended period of time. They need enhanced investments and know-how to build their productive capacities. There can be some innovative and transitional financing mechanism meant for them. I can assure you that LDCs will also keep their side of the bargain. Our nations do not ask for charity. What we seek are our dues international commitments. I thank you all. Thank you very much.
I thank the Prime Minister of the People's Republic of Bangladesh, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mevlut Cavusoglu, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey, to deliver a statement on behalf of the President of the Republic of Turkey.
His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, distinguished heads of state and governments, Mr. Secretary General, Presidents of the General Assembly and ECOSOC, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first convey the greetings of President Erdogan. He wanted to join us today. However, he had to stay in Turkey to supervise the relief and reconstruction efforts following the terrible earthquakes. President Erdogan considers sustainable development of the least developed countries as a top priority. He has full confidence that this conference will be a milestone in developing a new global partnership, a partnership that will ensure that LDCs benefit from social, economic and environmental development, a cooperation that will ensure the global economic and financial system doesn't create further inequalities, a commitment that will secure that LDCs are not held back by decisions taken far beyond their borders. In this regard, we appreciate the remarkable efforts of both Qatar and United Nations. We wish to thank His Highness Sheikh Tamim and gentlemen, dear friends. On February 6, 2 earthquakes shook southeastern Turkey. Our nation is in deep sorrow today. However, this sincere international solidarity warms our hearts and gives us strength. LDCs were among the first to offer support and solidarity during the darkest days. We recognize that extending this helping hand was, in some cases, a significant sacrifice in itself. Turkish nation will never forget it. Your solidarity after the earthquake showed once again that you are the most developed and generous in heart. A sincere thank you from your sisters and brothers in Turkey. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our gathering today in Doha takes place at a time when the international system is passing through swift transformations. Least developed countries are the most vulnerable in face of such developments. It is our collective responsibility to support the development and progress of vulnerable nations. Turkey, as a long-standing and reliable partner of LDCs, is doing its best and remains committed. You may all remember President Erdogan hosted the LDC4 conference in Istanbul in 2011, which drew a 10-year roadmap. Our efforts didn't end there. We held the comprehensive midterm review of the Istanbul program in 2016 in my hometown, Antalya. Turkey, along with Belgium, is the co-chair of the group of friends of the LDCs at the United Nations. The UN Technology Bank in Turkey is the only UN agency dedicated to the LDCs exclusively. Finally, Turkey is one of the top-ranking countries in development and humanitarian assistance and contributes to LDC's efforts in many fields, including capacity building. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we cannot leave the LDCs behind. We must act now without further delay. First, the food security. It's a shame that we are nowhere near ending hunger in the 21st century. The Istanbul Grain Initiative that we brokered with the United Nations helped every household around the world, especially in LDCs, by bringing down the global food prices. We are working hard for its smooth implementation and further extension. That is what we discussed with Secretary General Guterres last night. Second, we cannot tolerate two separate worlds with a digital and technological gap between them. In the last decade of action to achieve sustainable and inclusive recovery, there is no time to lose. Third, we must break the vicious cycles that make development further difficult. The global economic and financial system must be reformed. We must find ways to combat climate change, which affects LDCs most, although they did nothing to cause it. Ladies and gentlemen, the Doha Program of Action succeeds in the commitments of the Istanbul Program and offers prospects to build resilience. We invite all nations to embrace the program and scale up international efforts. Once again, our sincere thanks to the State of Qatar and the United Nations. Thank you very much.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, and I now invite Ms. Molapo, the youth representative from Lesotho, to make a statement.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, fellow youth, Sabah al Khair. I am humbled to be standing before you this morning, not on my accord, but to represent the 226 million young people from all 46 least developed countries. You can all imagine what a huge task this is, and I can't afford to fumble. It is all the more daunting because young people have been genuinely and meaningfully engaged in this 5th LDC conference, and we're proud to be part of the Doha Program of Action process. Whilst we wish all of our colleagues could be able to participate in the conference, those of us that are here will carry their voice, and we're here to be part of the solution to the issues facing the LDCs. Our intention is to speak truth to power, but still find ways to work with the decision makers to make meaningful change. Distinguished guests, my name is Reekeditso Molapo. I am a social entrepreneur and an environmental activist, and for the past 28 years of my life, I've been living in a least developed country. This means that I have seen and lived through my fair share of the issues that the LDCs face. My dream is to experience a different reality in my lifetime. When the Doha Program of Action comes to an end, I'll be 36, a youth no more. When I look around me, I want to see real change, better chances, equal opportunities. The challenges facing my country and the other LDCs are well known, especially in this audience. Energy poverty, climate vulnerability, unemployment, conflict, the list could and does go on and on. However, I'm not here today to pinpoint how difficult the situation is, but instead to accentuate the courage and the audacity of the LDC youth. I want to speak not about adversity, but about our aspirations. Aspirations that include access to decent employment, quality education and entrepreneurship, aspirations to live in fair, resilient, sustainable, and gender-equal societies, societies where we are empowered to realize our full potential, societies where we are recognized as rights holders and key stakeholders in the implementation and monitoring and evaluation of the international programs designed to support us. And lastly, societies that look forward to graduating from the sorry category of being the furthest behind in reaching our development goals. Young people from the LDCs are dynamic, bold, and innovative. We are also resilient. We have to be. Our ambition is impressive, and we have overcome a lot, and against all odds, we continue to drive positive change in our countries. We do not only talk about the problems we face, but we act on them too. We're rolling up our sleeves and we're busy in the work of solving all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. For example, Muriel Mpengegese from Burundi creates employment for vulnerable youth and supports livelihoods through her initiatives. Shaima Barakat from Yemen prototypes and tests solutions for the different SDGs. Gladys Habu from the Solomon Islands advocates for climate issues, especially those faced by small island developing states. And Kwaile Monaheng from Lesotho has started and works for clean energy projects that aim to expand energy access in Africa. These are but a few examples amongst many. For us as youth, the impact marathon continues. To the decision makers and heads of state in the room, we urge you to accelerate your action on the issues facing the LDCs. We demand you create enabling environments for us to thrive, recognize our potential, and take heed to our youth declaration. We need you to urgently invest in youth socially and financially. And lastly, we request that you lead us to sustainable graduation by formally and systematically including youth in the implementation of the Doha Program of Action, because its success depends on this. To my fellow youth, let us continue scaling our impact, be strategic in our actions, to be activists and protesters when we need to be, but also ready to infiltrate these spaces where we can influence policies, agendas, and structures. In the end, moving from potential to prosperity and fulfilling Agenda 2030 requires all hands on deck. A partnership with the youth in the LDCs, a revision of old unsustainable systems, and a commitment by individuals, institutions, civil society, the private sector, and governments to reach this collective goal. Dear colleagues, the LDC category is almost twice as old as me. Let us work together to make sure we will not need it for another 50 years. The youth would like to reiterate the importance of all countries graduating, and we look forward to a future where least developed is a concept found in the history books. Shukran laka.
Shukran.
Thank you.
أشكر السيدة مولابو.
I thank Ms. Molapo for her statement. Distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard the last speaker for the opening segment of the conference. The conference has thus concluded its consideration of Agenda Item 1. Before proceeding further, delegates are reminded that at its plenary meeting